Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This happened around 5 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, 3 units each. We lived in 2 of them and rented out the other 4. The street was lined with these 3 flats on both sides for about a mile. Many didn't have parking. The side streets had single-family homes and minimal street parking. Since it was our primary residence, we had more land than most properties with parking for about 16 cars. Things ran smoothly for many years. Then random cars started showing up in our lot. One day, I blocked in an unfamiliar vehicle. Looking out my window later, I watched in disbelief as this guy named Mike from 3 buildings down actually drove through our landscaping to escape. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I yelled from my window. "This is public parking," he shouted back, speeding away. I called the police, but they said, "Sorry, sir, it's a civil matter. Not much we can do." So I contacted a towing company. They put up clear "no parking, violators will be towed" signs. We had to call them for enforcement, but the signs seemed effective. The unauthorized parking stopped until New Year's Eve 2019. I got home around 8 p.m. and every single spot was taken. Cars were even parked on the street, blocking others in. "You won't believe this," I told my wife Sarah. "The entire lot is full of strangers' cars." I called the towing company. "Sorry, buddy," the dispatcher said. "We're swamped. Earliest we can get there is 2 a.m. We were in the Minneapolis suburbs and it was negative 10 degrees. That's when inspiration struck. I dug out the lawn sprinklers and hoses, connecting one to the laundry room's hot water tap so the equipment wouldn't freeze. The cars and ground, however, that was a different story. I set up 3 sprinklers, relocating them every 30 minutes or so for nearly 5 hours. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, watching from the window. "They asked for it," I replied, adjusting another sprinkler. By midnight, every vehicle and inch of pavement was encased in ice. I made sure to target the locks, window seals, and grills. After putting away the equipment, I went to bed. At 4 a.m., angry pounding and constant doorbell ringing jolted us awake. "Open up! You ruined our cars!" someone shouted. We called the police and waited until they arrived before going outside. The officers could barely contain their amusement. Turned out Mike, the bush-driving neighbor, had told these people they could park here. "Officer," I said calmly, pointing to the sign, "these are all unauthorized vehicles." One angry partygoer yelled, "We were told this was public parking." "Well," the officer responded, trying not to smile, "these signs clearly indicate otherwise. The police issued tickets since I gave permission for enforcement on private property. Every car had to be towed because they were frozen shut. Would have made a great viral video, but smartphones weren't as common back then." The next one is an entitled People's Story. Let me tell you about how I ended up in a legal battle with the most entitled homeowner association president I've ever encountered. This happened over the course of the last year, and it still blows my mind when I think about it. I'm a 32-year-old software engineer, and after years of saving, I finally had enough for a down payment on my first home. I found this beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a quiet complex about 20 minutes from downtown. The price was reasonable, the location was perfect, and everything seemed to be falling into place. I did my due diligence, had inspections done, reviewed all the homeowner association documents, and nothing raised any red flags. The closing went smoothly in March. I got my keys, and since my lease wasn't up until the end of May, I planned to take my time moving in and doing some minor renovations. I had the place painted and was getting new flooring installed before moving my furniture in. About 3 weeks after closing, I drove to the condo to check on the painting progress. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a "for sale" sign in front of my unit. At first, I thought it must be for a different unit, but nope, it was definitely mine. The sign had only been put up that morning because it wasn't there when the painters arrived earlier. I immediately called my realtor Sarah, thinking there must be some mistake. "Sarah, why is there a for sale sign in front of my condo?" "What? That's impossible. You already closed on it. Let me make some calls." While waiting to hear back from Sarah, I decided to call the number on the sign. A cheerful voice answered, "Hello, this is Karen Mitchell with Mitchell Realty." "Hi, I'm calling about the condo at 1234 Palm Court. There seems to be a mistake because I own that unit. I just closed on it 3 weeks ago." There was a pause before Karen responded in a completely different tone. "Oh, you must be Mr. Anderson. No, there's no mistake. The homeowner association has exercised its right to sell this property due to unauthorized renovations and failure to submit proper documentation." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What unauthorized renovations? I'm just having it painted and getting new flooring. Any modifications to the unit must be approved by the homeowner association board first, Karen said with smug satisfaction in her voice. Since you failed to submit the proper forms and began work without approval, the board voted to exercise our right of first refusal and sell the unit. That's absolutely insane. I own this property. You can't just sell it. Actually, we can. It's in the bylaws. You should have read them more carefully before purchasing. I suggest you contact your lawyer, she said before hanging up. I immediately called my real estate attorney, Mark Thompson. After explaining the situation, he was just as baffled as I was. They absolutely cannot do that, Mark said. I reviewed those homeowner association documents myself. There's nothing in there giving them the right to sell a property without the owner's consent. Something's very wrong here. Over the next few days, we discovered that Karen Mitchell wasn't just a realtor, she was also the homeowner association president. And this wasn't the first time she'd pulled something like this. She'd been on the board for 5 years, and there were multiple complaints about her abusing her position. Through some digging, we found out that Karen had a potential buyer lined up, her daughter. The plan was to sell my $350,000 condo to her daughter for $250,000, claiming it was distressed property due to unauthorized renovations. The whole thing reeked of fraud. I filed for an emergency injunction to stop any potential sale, and we began gathering evidence. The painters and flooring contractors provided statements confirming they'd only started work after I closed on the property. We also got copies of all homeowner association documents, which showed no provision allowing them to seize and sell properties for minor violations, but Karen wasn't backing down. She sent me a cease and desist letter, claiming I was harassing her by questioning the homeowner association's authority. She even had the locks changed on my unit and threatened to have me arrested for trespassing if I tried to enter homeowner association property. That's when things got really interesting. My lawyer contacted other residents in the complex, and we uncovered a pattern of similar behavior. Karen had attempted this same scheme twice before, but the previous owners had been intimidated into selling at a loss rather than fighting her. This is textbook fraud, Mark told me. She's using her position as homeowner association president and her real estate license to orchestrate property theft. We need to contact the State Real Estate Commission and the District Attorney's Office. We filed complaints with both agencies, but Karen still refused to back down. She actually had the nerve to show my condo to potential buyers while all this was going on. One day, I arrived to find her leading a tour through my property. I walked right up to the group and said, "Hi, I'm the legal owner of this property, and it is not for sale. This woman is attempting to fraudulently sell my home. I suggest you contact your own attorney before getting involved in this situation." Karen's face turned bright red. "How dare you interfere with my showing? I'm calling the police." "Please do," I replied calmly. "I'd love to show them my deed and closing documents." She hustled the potential buyers out quickly after that, but not before I managed to give them my lawyer's card. The situation came to a head when we discovered Karen had actually accepted a deposit from her daughter for the purchase of my unit. That's when the district attorney's office got really interested. They launched a formal investigation into both Karen and the homeowner association board. It turned out that Karen had been running quite the operation. She'd manipulate homeowner association rules and regulations to target specific units she wanted, usually ones that had just been purchased by single owners who she thought wouldn't put up much of a fight. She'd then try to force them out through a combination of harassment, fake fines, and threats, ultimately attempting to acquire the properties at below-market prices for her friends and family. The investigation revealed that 2 other board members were in on it. They'd received kickbacks for voting in Karen's favor on these fraudulent sales. The whole thing started unraveling like a cheap sweater. During all this, I still couldn't access my own property. The painters and flooring contractors had been forced to stop work, and I was paying both my rent and my mortgage. To say I was furious would be an understatement. My attorney filed a lawsuit against the homeowner association, Karen personally, and the other board members involved. We included claims for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and civil conspiracy. The damages we sought included all my expenses, lost time, legal fees, and punitive damages. One morning, about 2 months into this mess, I received a call from Mark. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Karen just listed her own house for sale." She's trying to skip town." "Oh, hell no," I responded. "She's not getting away with this." We immediately filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent her from selling her property or leaving the jurisdiction. The judge granted it within hours. When Karen was served with the order, she apparently had quite the meltdown in front of the process server. The district attorney's office moved quickly after that. They had enough evidence to charge Karen and her 2 co-conspirators with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. The State Real Estate Commission also suspended her license pending investigation. During a deposition, one of the other board members cracked under pressure and spilled everything. Karen had been running this scam for years, even before she became Homeowner Association president. She'd use her position as a realtor to identify potential targets, then use her homeowner association authority to pressure them into selling. She said no one would ever fight back, the board member testified. She told us homeowners are scared of homeowner associations and would rather sell at a loss than get into a legal battle. Well, she picked the wrong homeowner this time. The other residents were furious when the truth came out. A group of them cornered me one evening as I was checking on my unit. "We had no idea this was happening," said Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd lived there for 20 years. "We always thought Karen was just strict about the rules. We never imagined she was actually stealing people's homes." Another resident, Tom, spoke up. "My sister wanted to buy here last year, but Karen told her the unit she was interested in wasn't for sale. 2 months later, it sold to Karen's niece for $80,000 less than market value. Now we know why." The homeowner association called an emergency meeting to remove Karen and her conspirators from the board. The meeting was absolute chaos. Karen showed up despite being advised by her lawyer not to attend. "This is all a misunderstanding," she screamed when residents started demanding answers. "I was just trying to protect our property values. Mr. Anderson is the real criminal here, making unauthorized changes to his unit." "Oh, like painting the walls?" someone shouted. "The same color they already were?" "You tried to steal his house," another resident yelled. Karen stormed out of the meeting, but not before threatening to sue everyone for defamation. By this point, her threats were falling on deaf ears. The criminal case moved forward, and Karen's daughter turned state's evidence against her mother. She admitted the whole scheme had been her mother's idea, and she'd participated in similar deals before. In exchange for her testimony, she received immunity from prosecution. 9 months after I'd originally closed on my condo, the criminal case concluded. Karen and her 2 co-conspirators pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts of fraud and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, ordered to pay restitution to previous victims, and permanently lost her real estate license. The civil case settled shortly after. The Homeowner Association's insurance company agreed to pay substantial damages, and Karen was forced to sell her own home to contribute to the settlement. The irony of her having to sell her house at a loss was not lost on anyone. As for my condo, I finally got to move in almost a year after purchasing it. The new Homeowner Association board, elected after the whole mess, approved my renovations retroactively and implemented new rules to prevent anything like this from happening again. They even waived my Homeowner Association fees for a year as a gesture of good faith. The painters and flooring contractors returned to finish their work, and I finally got to make the place my home. The whole experience was a nightmare, but at least justice was served. Want to hear the wildest part? A few weeks after I moved in, I received a letter from Karen's attorney. She was trying to appeal her conviction and wanted me to write a letter to the judge saying it was all a misunderstanding. I framed that letter. It hangs in my home office as a reminder that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies no matter how powerful they think they are. Update: life after taking down the Homeowner Association. Karen. It's been about 8 months since my last post, and a lot has happened. I promised several people I'd update once everything was fully settled, so here we go. First, Karen's appeal was denied. Her attorney tried to argue that she had legitimate authority through the Homeowner Association to take the action she did, but the appeals court wasn't buying it. They upheld her conviction, and she's still serving her sentence. I heard through the grapevine that she's not enjoying prison very much. Apparently, other inmates don't take kindly to someone who made a career out of stealing people's homes. The most significant development came about 3 months ago when 2 more of her previous victims came forward. They had seen the news coverage of her conviction and realized they had been victims of the same scam. Both cases were from before she became Homeowner Association president, when she was just a board member. The district attorney's office is now investigating these cases, which means Karen might be facing additional charges. One of these victims, an elderly widow named Margaret, shared her story with me over coffee. Karen had convinced her that her late husband had violated numerous homeowner association regulations with some garage renovations he'd done before passing away. She pressured Margaret into selling her condo for $120,000 below market value, claiming it was the only way to avoid massive fines and legal action. The condo was then sold to Karen's cousin 2 weeks later. "I felt so stupid when I finally realized what she'd done," Margaret told me, wiping away tears. "But I was grieving and she seemed so authoritative, I just wanted the stress to end." Thanks to the restitution order from Karen's conviction, Margaret will finally get her money back. She's also filed her own civil suit against Karen and the Homeowner Association's insurance company. The new Homeowner Association board has been working hard to rebuild trust with the community. They implemented a complete overhaul of the approval process for home modifications. Now all requests are reviewed by a committee of 5 residents, and any rejection can be appealed to the full board. They also hired an independent property management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the possibility of another board member abusing their power. Remember Tom, the resident whose sister had been pushed out of buying here? She finally got her condo in the complex. When one of Karen's co-conspirators was forced to sell their unit as part of the restitution agreement, Tom's sister was able to purchase it at a fair price. She moved in last month, and we've become good friends. The whole experience has actually brought our community closer together. We now have monthly resident meetings where people can voice concerns and suggest improvements. The toxic atmosphere that Karen created is gone, replaced by a genuine sense of community. As for my condo, it's finally exactly how I wanted it. The renovation work was completed without any further drama, and I've even made some improvements to the patio area, with proper homeowner association approval, of course. My neighbors joke that I should run for the homeowner association board since I have experience fighting corruption, but I'm content just being a regular resident. One interesting footnote. Karen's daughter reached out to me through my attorney to apologize. She explained that her mother had been manipulating and controlling her entire life, and testifying against her was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She's in therapy now and working to rebuild her life away from her mother's influence. While I appreciate her apology, I told her I needed time before I could consider any kind of forgiveness. The civil settlement money finally came through last week. After legal fees, I still had enough to fully furnish my condo and set up a nice emergency fund. I also donated a portion to a local legal aid organization that helps homeowners fight predatory homeowner association practices. They've already helped 3 other homeowners in similar situations. Last weekend, we had a community barbecue in the common area. As I looked around at all my neighbors enjoying themselves, kids playing on the lawn, and people genuinely happy to be part of this community, I realized something important. Sometimes fighting back against injustice isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting everyone who might come after you. Mrs. Rodriguez summed it up perfectly when she raised her glass in a toast. To our community, where homes are for living in, not for stealing. I still can't believe I had to fight for almost a year just to move into a home I legally owned, but I wouldn't change how it turned out. Taking down Karen and her corruption ring made this community stronger, and I'm proud to call this place home. Oh, and that framed letter from Karen's attorney requesting my help with her appeal? I added a copy of the appeals court's denial right next to it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting justice take its course. The next one is a malicious compliances story. So back in the day, I was a truck driver. The company had a few trucks that were made for different jobs. Depending on the job you had to deliver determined the truck you drove. So it was not too uncommon to drive 3 different trucks in one day. The company was piss poor on maintenance of the vehicles. Over the years with them, I received a few fines for things like no inspection and stuff like that. Even though I received the fine, the company would pay the fine. No harm, no foul. Finally, our big truck really started to go downhill. It got to the point where it was barely running and needed a ton of repairs costing thousands to fix. I told the company I refused to drive the truck as it was an accident waiting to happen. Well, this lasted a week and then they said that I needed to drive the truck for 1 delivery. Unfortunately, I agreed out of a need to be a team player and service my customer. The drive was horrible. It was leaving a trail of smoke 10 feet high as I drove down the highway. I knew I was in trouble when they loaded a case of motor oil in the cab for me to fill the engine if needed. On the way there, the AM cars behind me were turning on their high beams to see Bicaju of the smoke trail I was leaving. Then as the sun finally came up, people were pulling up next to me on the highway, honking and giving me the finger. I found out so much liquid oil was coming out the exhaust that oil was landing on the vehicles behind me. It was only a 50-mile round trip, and the truck lost 24 quarts of oil and almost a tank of fuel. So I told them I would not drive the truck till it's fixed. As a truck driver, you are required to do a pre-trip inspection of the vehicle prior to driving every day. You mark down the defects and there is room for notes in the logbook. One copy stays in the truck and one copy goes to the company. There's a third copy that goes to DOT if requested. I made sure to fill this out fully every time I drove this truck. I also made a separate list, mostly as a note for myself covering things that I thought was important but not necessarily a part of the pre-trip inspection. The next day I came in and found the truck fully loaded. I told them I was not driving the truck. They said, "Well, you have too." After a quick thought I said, "Okay, key malicious compliance." I pulled out of the lot. At the traffic light I'd make a left to head to the job. However, I was out of fuel, so I had to turn right to get to the gas station to fuel up, then backtrack to head to the job. And yes, I meant gas. It was a 33 KLB truck with a gas engine. Well, DOT was set up on the other side of the road just before the gas station. They watched as I drove by, wishing they could get me. In case you don't know, DOT stands for the Department of Transportation. For big trucks, they run the weigh stations on the highway, but in heavy truck areas, they set up a mobile station and inspect trucks randomly. They verify paperwork is in order and the vehicle and driver are safe. Any fines here are expensive, plus they can put a truck out of service, meaning it cannot be driven till repaired. At that point, it must be towed and fixed. Then I pull in the fuel station. As I'm filling, I can feel them watching me. So, I leave the fuel station and head back towards DOT. They run out into the street to make me pull in. They wanted this truck. I pull in and shut down the truck. The DOT cop walks up to the truck with a creeper. I say, "Why do you need that?" He says, "What?" I say, "The creeper?" He says, "I gotta check your truck." I say, "Nah, I got a list." I hand him my notes and logbook. He says, Then he goes back to his car and I can see him furiously writing. After about 30 minuets, he comes back. He says to me, "Why are you driving this truck?" I tell him they told me I had to. "There's no other truck?" he asks. "Nope," I reply. "What happens if you don't drive this?" he asks. I say, "I guess I sit home." He says, "I'll be right back." After about another 20 minuets, he comes back to me. He slaps a big red out-of-service tag on the windshield. Then he tells me, "There are 21 issues that are putting the truck out of service, plus I am giving the company a fine for letting you drive this truck. Unfortunately, your fuel tax sticker is expired. If I write you up for this, it is a $10,000 fine to you. But I called in the local cops. It will be a $90 fine for you that the company should pay." I thank him and he leaves. I call the company and get a ride back to the warehouse. Bottom line, they paid all fines, which were north of $65,000 including towing. The next week we had a fleet of new lease trucks with a maintenance plan with replacement trucks, if ours were down for issues. And they came out and washed the trucks twice a month. I worked there another 2 years and quit because of other truck issues. A competitor poached me with better money. But this goes to show, I am not risking my life and the public's life for your job. In the end, you paid for a $65,000 lesson. When I say I'm not doing it unless it's safe. Then I pull in the fuel station. As I'm filling, I can feel them watching me. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.